Shabbos Parshas Emer Yutas Ir Tavshin Lamed Daled, and it's a Mugga Maimer. The Rebbe gave it out, was Magia it in Tavshin Lamed, Tavshin Memtes, though it's a Maimer from Tavshin Lamed Daled. Okay, so in the Zohar it's brought down as follows. On the day that the Reb Shimon ben Yochai passed away, on Lag BaOmer, Pasach Reb Shimon Va'amar, Reb Shimon opened and said, began teaching Va'amar, and he said, Ani l'doidi v'alai shukasoi. It says that I am to my beloved, that Hashem, that the Jewish people are in love with Hashem, they're loving Hashem, but va'alai, and in result, in continuation of that, upon me, upon the Yidden, is his desire for us. In other words, kamayim upon him, like we've been learning in Tanya lately. So the Rashbi continued by saying, Kol yoimin dis katarna b'hai alma, all the days that I was bound up in this world, in other words, that my neshama was tied in this world, still in all, this fact that my neshama was bound up in this world did not interfere with my connection to Hashem. And with one bond, I was bounded with the Eibishter. And therefore, begin kach, for this reason, hashton, now, the result of that is, v'alai shukasoi, that upon me is his love and desire. So in other words, it's the same idea of the pasuk, because the Rashbi was the whole time in a state of binding himself with the Eibishter in a way of Anila Doidi. So the result of that, especially on the day of his passing away, is Valai Shukasai. Later on, the Behemshach Inyan, so it says further on, Mistakel Avena Kol Yoima. I was looking and examining every day, B'haikra D'chsiv, in this pasuk that says, B'Hashem Tisal Nafshi Cholu, that my soul is praising Hashem, meaning my soul has this intimate connection with Hashem. And then there's a continuation of the pasuk that he had. There was like questions that he had. And now, again, Lag BaOmer, the day of his passing, the entire pasuk is fulfilled. Danishmasi be'achida, because my neshama is now, on the day of my passing, one with him, be'lahita. It is a flame, in flame with him. Beis dapkas cholu. It is in a way of cleaving to him. The Rashbi was saying that for the duration, for the whole entire days of his life, kol yom in this katarna b'hayalm, all the days that was bound up in this world. Haya Rab Shimon bar Yochai mekusher v'akadosh baruch hu. Rab Shimon bar Yochai was bound up with Hashem. Iskatarna v'l'shayin kasher. The word iskatarna is, like we're going to explain soon, the Aramaic for the word knot and bond. K'moi vatiksha al yadi shani. It says over there that there were the two children that were born to Yehuda and Tamar, and the first one that came out, they tied on his hand a red strand, a red string, to be able to know which one came out first with Tirgim. And the Targum Onkelos translates K'daras al yadei zahirisa, that they tied on the hand of the child a shining, in other words, the luminous type of color of the red. So we see that the word kesher and ketaras are connected. So that's what it means when he says that he was bound up all of his days with Hashem. And the Rebbe explains what's the idea of hiskashrus. The hiskashrus, hidavke b'shnei dvar. We use the term binding and making a knot and so on. This is when there are two distinct and separate items, and you're binding them together. That was all of his days of his life. What happened at the Histalkus, at the passing of the Rashbi, that was something greater than just binding together two things. By Idna b'yem Histalkusai, this time at the day of his passing, Giel the Darga Niles Yosef, the Rashbi reached a higher level, that he became one with Hashem, more than just a binding of two separate things. That's why it says, Va'idna be'achida, now I'm one with him beyond the binding of two things. So now the Rebbe is going to explain, it doesn't mean that the oneness of the Rashbi with Hashem did not take place at all beforehand. Because if the Rashbi was working towards that the whole time, like it says, the whole time I was looking at the pasuk and I wanted to know and so on, this means that he was always in a state of union and oneness even beyond binding, except it's just a matter of revelation. Let's see the second paragraph, line 15. Though the level of being one with Hashem, Rab Shimon ben Yochai reached only the day of his istalkus, like we said before, Va'idna now, but still in all, since all of the days of his life, he put in effort to reach this level. Like it says, Mistak, that the Rashbi was the whole time looking at this pasuk and saying, this is what I'm aiming for, this is what I want, and so on. Moving is understood, Shabachlolis Shaykh Lazeh, V'Yigil Lazeh, Gam B'Chayev, top of the second page. We must say that in general, that he was connected with this level of unity and oneness with Hashem, and he attained this level of unity and oneness with Hashem also in his lifetime. The perfection, the completion of this oneness, Kula, the entire pasuk, like the Rashbi said, when there was a whole pasuk, Niskayim, that's Niskayim by Ha'idna, that occurred now, B'yom Istalkusai, in the day of his Istalkus. Now the Rebbe is going to connect it with the idea that the Rashbi was known to be Torasei U'Manasei, that Torah was his profession, and this has to do with drawing down a very deep level of godliness. And that connection with that very deep level of godliness shows that the union that the Rashbi had even earlier in his lifetime was not just a union and a joining of two separate things like a kesher, like a bond, like a knot, but it was a union of one thing. So he says in the end of line 2, like it's understood also from what's explained in the series of Amarim of Tavri Samach Vav, the fact that the involvement of the Torah of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai was in such a manner that Torah was his profession. So Al Pi Chassidus, what does it mean that the Torah is profession? That means that it's not something that's like additional to him. Someone who's in doing Torah study, whenever he gets a free chance. So there's him, and then there's a Torah study. In truth, that since the Torah study of the Rashbi was in a way it's his profession, that means it's his whole life, it's his whole being. In Kabbalah terminology that means in line 5, his involvement of Torah was in the way of drawing down the masculine waters from above. In other words, it was like a continuation of the revelation from above. He wasn't something separate from the Amshach above of Torah. With the like Shar Tanoim, not like all the other Tanoim, his colleagues, Shalim and Shalom Moisabayim, and Allah Maim Nukvim, that their Torah study was in a way of elevating the feminine waters, which means it wasn't about the Oyer, it was about the Keli. Oyer is totally miyuchad, Keli is about something else. Therefore, you could interrupt, and you can have times when you're learning and times when you're not learning. So this idea of Torah in a way of drawing down the masculine waters, he says in line 8, to a inyan, the Bei, Achida Bei Lehita. That's the level of I'm one with Hashem, and it's my soul is a flaming fire with Hashem. The fact that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, his Torah was his profession, this was throughout his life. So therefore it's understood that since the Rebbe Rashab connects the idea of the one flame that the Rashbi was with Hashem, with the fact that he was Torah Nasi, Torah was his profession, So therefore, since Torah was a profession his whole life, so it's understood that this idea of the unity that the Rashbi said, now I was one and my soul was inflamed and so on, is not just now, but it was all of his life, because all of his life he was Torah Nasir. So the Rebbe goes on and says, line 11, we get at. Muva in the Nishmasi Be'achida. In many Mamorim, he doesn't distinguish. And he says, the Rashbi was bound up with one bond with Hashem, and he was Achida, he was one with Hashem, and he was fire, etc. If the Zohar said it as two separate things, why did Amorim just say it as one continuous idea? Because he explains who, because that the reason is because even in the level of the bond that's like two separate things, in the pnimius of it, the inner component of it, the inner aspect of it is that they are really one. The only thing is, this is not something that's necessarily apparent at the time until he passed away. So he says in line 15, throughout the days of the Rashbi's life, this aspect of his union with Hashem, that it was like one thing, was not revealed. Rather, what was revealed, just the idea of a bond, that they were two separate things. The day of the Rashbi's passing, then the inner part becomes revealed. The root and the source of all matters of the service of a person that he served throughout the days of his life. Then becomes revealed the inner part, that with one bond he is bound up with Hashem. It's not just a bond, but it's a total oneness is revealed on the day of his istalkus, but not that it wasn't present previous, it was there previously as well. So the Rebbe is going to elaborate on this by first introducing something else. Up till now we were talking about the difference between hiskashrus and achdus. Hiskashrus means when you bind together two separate things. Achdus means that they're essentially one. To understand that more, he's going to contrast hiskashrus with something that's even less than hiskashrus. Achdus is more than hiskashrus. What he's about to introduce is the idea of dveikus. Dveikus, cleaving, is even less. So he says in Ois Beis, line 22, this will be understood by first prefacing what's known, even though bonding, hiskashrus, is lower than the level of achdus, but still in all, it is higher than the level of dveikus, of cleaving. The dveikus is external. Like it says in the pasuk, kasher yidbak ha'ezer el masnei ish, like a belt cleaves to the loins of a man. So obviously, this is an external connection. That's only an external connection. You put the belt around the person. On the other hand, when we use the term iskashrus in a bond, that shows on an inner connection. Like it says about Yaakov Binyamin v'nafshei kshura b'nafshei, that the soul of Yaakov and Binyamin were bound up with each other. This reaches internally. So he says this difference between dveikus and iskashrus, that dveikus is external and iskashrus is internal, one is chitzonius, one is pnimius, is also the difference. This is also the difference between karbonis and k'toris. The avoidus karbonis, he mitzad zeh Yisrael dvukim b'Hakadosh Baruch Hu kedisa medrash u'bezoyar. It's brought down the medrash in the Zohar that the reason why Yidden have this avoida of karbonis, that is because they are dovuk in Hashem. So again, the veikis has to do with karbonis. V'lechein hayu makriv makarbonos al mizbeach hachitzon. That's why the karbonos, they were brought on the external mizbeach that was out in the azara, made out of stone. The benefesh ha'adam u'chitzonis halev. What that corresponds to, the outer mizbeach corresponds to the external part of the heart, just like the oren that had in it the luchos, which is the idea of Torah, corresponds to the level of the brain. So too the mizbeach is likened to the heart. It's in the center of the Beis Hamikdash and so on. It's likened to the heart. But since there are two mizbeachos, there's the outer mizbeach of stone and the inner mizbeach of gold, so that outer mizbeach of stone is talking about the external part of the heart. The k'toros, on the other hand, the k'toros, hu l'shoin kesher. The incense offering is also connected with the word kesher, bond, like we said before, the kol kesher shav pasuk meturgim ktar. Whenever it says the word kesher in a pasuk in Chumash, the Targum Onkelos translates it as ketar, because ketar is the Aramaic, the test and the shin get switched around, is the Aramaic for the word kesher. So if you're talking about ketoides, ketoides is not just about external. Like we said, kesher is internal. Carbon is from the word close. It's not kesher. It's close. It's like the external devekis of a belt or on a person. So therefore, he says in line 8, therefore the ketoides is on the inner altar, the inner mizbeach. The benefesh adam upnimis halev. Then we're talking about within the person, what is the level of the inner mizbeach within the person? That's the inner part of the heart. The difference between the avodah of the external part of the heart to the avodah of the inner part of the heart. The avodah of the external part of the heart is when I reach a love of Hashem or an awe of Hashem because I understand, because I thought about it, because I contemplated it, and I understand the greatness of Hashem that brings me to have a love for Him, that brings me to be in awe of Him. So, when we're talking about a love that's based on intellect, the very idea of intellect is something that changes. And not only that, even if the idea doesn't change, the mind is not always pumping the information into the heart. So initially, maybe the mind brought him to have a love, and then when he stops thinking about it, after a while, the love will disappear. So that's the whole avodah that's based on pitam v'das. The avodah that's based on intellect is something that is external to the person. Something that's external to the person can change. The avodah of the inner part of the heart is beyond reason and knowledge. That connection with Hashem, that's beyond reason, there's no change in it. And therefore, it has to do with constancy, as we can. That's why it's the inner part of the heart. That's the idea why karbonos, like we mentioned before, is from the expression of closeness. That's the word carbon, close, karev. K'toides lashon iskashrus, and k'toides from the word bond. The kiruv moirashu mitzias. When we talk about closeness, that shows there is there's an entity, alashu karev lalakus, but that entity has become close to Hashem. But it's still a possibility that even though he's close to Hashem, there could occur a distancing. But the bond of ketoides is an existing bond, and it's a constant bond. The true idea of a bond that remains and not that remains is that it's impossible to change it, or it's not applicable to change, it's constant. So now we're still in the middle of explaining the difference between iskatros on a lower level, not the iskatros on the higher level of achdus. So we're explaining still the difference between iskatros and dvekis. Ois Gimel, line 20. This difference between cleaving and bonding is in the avoida from below to above, the karbonis v'ktoiris shneimim amud avoida she'elam ha'elam matal milo. Both the karbonis and the ktoiris are the part of the pillar of the service in the Beis Hamikdash. And the service is about ascending and rising up from below to above. So, just like there's a difference in dveikis niskashrus when it goes from below to above, and the same thing, v'achiluk ben dveikis niskashrus bin hamshachem l'maylo l'mata, top of page ches. And the difference in the dveikis and niskashrus in the hamshacha that comes from above to below, which, if you remember, we also spoke about in the Maimer about the 3 times Kaddish, that the first Kaddish corresponds to davening, that's going below to above, and the last 2 Kaddishes is about the Malmaylo Lamata, which is Torah, Gnos Chasadim, the other 2 pillars. So in the other 2 pillars, there is also Dveikis and Iskashrus. So it's like it's brought down the Zohar, how beloved are the Yidden before Hashem, and he wants to be joined with the Yidden, and he wants to be bound up with the Yidden. So the fact that it uses 2 expressions, so it indicates 2 ways how Hashem connects with the Yidden. So Varad Moram Tzoi, the Mittler Rebbe explains the Lisdapke Bahu. How does the Eibishter join with us? How does he cleave to us? Why they are mitzvahs? It's through mitzvahs. The oil that comes down through mitzvahs is in a level that transcends and encompasses the person, surrounds the person. Like it says in the pasuk, his right will embrace me. The light that comes down through the mitzvahs embraces the person that fulfills the mitzvahs. Like we had this also recently in Tanya, the Chesed Roy Yeminak, Vrud Roy Smala, and the Gufa is the middle, so we have that embrace from Hashem, the Chibuk U'Machut. But still in all, an embrace is outside of the person. It's chitzonius. Therefore, when it comes to mitzvahs, it talks about Hashem wanting to join or cleave to the Yidden. That cleaving is an external bond, an external joining. But then the Zohar also says that that Hashem wants to bond with the Yidden more than just dveikis. And to bond with the Yidden that Hashem wants, that's through Torah. Because that which is drawn down through Torah is something that's internal into the person. Like it says, that your Torah is within my innards, meaning that the Torah becomes one and joined within me. Like that Rabbi Tanya explains in Perikei, so yichud sheyichud kamayu, my mind and the Eibishter's mind come completely joined, and so on. Therefore, when it comes to Torah, it says that he will bond with them. That bonding shows on an inner joining. The joining of the Yidden with Hashem, or Hashem with the Yidden through Torah, is called bonding. Like we find the other Maimer Kabbalah, Tlos Kishrin, Inan Miskashrin Dabada, there are 3 bonds or 3 knots. They are bound up one of the other. Kuchabrichu Ayrais of Yisrael, Hashem and Torah and the Eden. So we see that Torah is the creation and the means through which the bond takes place. Because Torah is more than mitzvahs, which is only like the Vekas, which is only something chitzoni.